Welcome to Good Catholic Great Stories, where we explore fascinating stories from and for the world of Catholicism.
Hi, welcome to Good Catholic Great Stories. I'm Christian Tappy. Today we're joined in studio for the first time in a long time by Thomas Savoy. Tom is the founder and director of the Carolina Catholic Chorale, the director of sacred music and liturgical events at St. Thomas Aquinas in Charlotte, North Carolina, and the director of music at St. Joseph Minor Seminary, also in Charlotte. He has served as director of music for the Cathedral of the Immaculate Conception, and as well as the New York Catholic Chorale. Tom has also written and performed cabarets, musicals, and operas. He is an organ and piano recitalist performing around the country. Welcome, Tom. It's great to have you here.
Pleasure to be here.
So we had the pleasure of working with you a few months back on our Advent series, Journey to Christmas, and you and the seminarians recorded a wonderful rendition of the O Antiphons for our Advent series, which I think people loved. And you've long injected this sort of classical sacred music into the scene in Charlotte for the past 10 or so years, in New York before that, and now with the seminary. I think it's needed in the church today. But I'm curious, what got you started down that path of classical music, and especially classical sacred music?
Oh, boy. Well, there's a couple of things, one of which is growing up in the period that I grew up in was certainly not the high water mark for Catholic music, certainly of our esteemed tradition. So a lot of the impetus for what I found myself doing was really to put the best face on the Catholic Church and Catholic Church music, because I was surrounded by Protestant musicians and people who had wonderful programs. They belonged to the American Guild of Organists, and they were Episcopals and Methodists, and they wasted no opportunity in informing me that I was, not personally, but my faith was forsaking the best musical tradition in the world, and why were you doing that, and look at the music you're doing. And so after a while, you start asking yourself some fundamental questions, and I just was sick and tired of suffering this type of, I don't want to say humiliating. Yes, it was humiliating, because we are in possession of the finest musical tradition in the world. Why weren't we doing it? And so I sort of spent the last 30 to 40 years trying to write that in my own world and put the best face on Catholicism and its Catholic music as I could. So I guess that really was the start of it. It just, why would you be content with second or third best when you had the best?
Right, absolutely. So you talked about that shift, right? And some of these other traditions, the Episcopals had beautiful music, and it continued, and the Catholic Church kind of lost that, I'll say, banal or, I don't know, self-looking music. I don't know how to describe it. We all know kind of the music that many of us grew up with. What do you think are the reasons for that shift away when you have this beautiful tradition that the Catholic Church has? And then it seems like a pretty swift shift from that beautiful tradition to the music we had in the late 1900s.
Yeah, it folded like a house of cards.
Yeah, and so
it was very quick.
And so the people making the music, obviously, I don't think anybody goes out there, correct me if I'm wrong, but nobody's going out there to make bad music or to make music that they think people won't like. So I'm curious if, from your experience in your career, if you have any insight into why that type of music really took off in the late 1900s.
Well, I do, but how much of it I can go through here is a different story. But I think primarily what needs to be figured in there is that in my generation, your typical Roman Catholic Church musician didn't even know what real Roman Catholic music was or is. Okay, you were presented with a document like Music in Catholic Worship, which was from the bishop, 1972-ish. That was what we built our whole ministries on, the liturgical ministries, and the musical, the liturgical, and the pastoral viewpoints. And so the pastoral viewpoint always seemed to predominate, which is certainly is a viable dimension. But what that meant was it got translated into the lowest common denominator. And you deal very much with the culture of Catholicism, and the culture of Catholicism in this country was not well known for supporting ambitious music programs, I would say. So the general tenor of music in your average parish, maybe in the early 60s or the late 50s and early 60s, somebody who could play a pretty slick guitar, actually performance-wise, maybe gave a better impression than some of the pretty meager choral and organ resources in your average program. Just wasn't really well-meaning people, but it just wasn't that good. We just never applied those artistic standards to people. It was, either they were a nice guy or a nice gal, or they played for free.
Yep.
And there was a lot of that, box of chocolates a year for Aunt Susie at the organ, So that left to another generation to redress that.
Yeah, and so you've been part of the rebirth here of kind of bringing this sacred music back to the church, I think, and your work is amazing. And I'm wondering if you consider yourself part of a movement, or if this is kind of an isolated thing around the country. How prominent it is? I know that I've experienced orchestral masses that you've put on. Obviously, that's not happening at every church around the country. But is there a wider movement of this desire to bring the sacred music back to the tradition, or is this kind of nascent?
I think that there's a certain element in the country that has swung a little more toward the conservative, particularly since Pope Benedict XVI and the new liturgical movement. That sort of was a gathering place for a lot of, especially younger people. The average person, if I was to say when I was 18, him doing a Latin Mass, people in their 70s would jump up and down just thanking me for some kind of sanity in a world that their world had been turned upside down. Whereas now, if I tell someone in that age group, just a little bit older than me, okay, they think I'm crazy.
Yeah.
It seems to be the generational shift is toward a younger generation that appreciates the music of the tradition. It's not that there are not people in my generation that do, but the majority don't and can be actually a bit hostile toward it. So I found myself, I don't want to say the cutting edge is the wrong thing, but I was always on the wrong end of the argument, right. Trying to do. So when we formed the New York Catholic Chorale, that was formed that in 1997, and that was a result of a visit to Monsignor Richard Schuler in St. Paul, Minnesota, who was at St. Agnes Church. He did 35 orchestral masses a year.
Wow.
And he was doing this in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s when it was even more of a cultural no-no, but he didn't care. He was really a standard bearer. So we did that, and it was sort of off and running,
Yeah.
But at the same time, in the diocese that I was in, let's just say that wasn't the predominant form of worship, okay? Right. So I got invited to a few less cocktail parties and a few less dinners, and so you're sort of out there. But at the same time, Catholic music is the worst kept secret in the world. I mean, I always tell the story. They used to fund the New York Catholic Chorale. They do Christmas concerts. And the big HMO up there, CDPHP, did it. And Bill Cromie, who was the CEO, was one of my singers. And he had an atheist friend that would come to our Christmas concert, and sit in the back and just cry his eyes out. Oh, yeah. It's like our daughter, who's an opera singer, says, Dad, she goes, musical theater is the entry-level drug to opera, okay? Well, our music is the entry level for many people to the even more profound elements of our faith, They can sit there and listen to a Palestrina motet and just get blown right away. They might not be ready for the Summa yet, but they a little bit of Palestrina burdens a long way.
Yeah, well, bring people in through beauty is
it's
tried and true, right?
Yeah, so that's why people I know, it's Russian roulette with 5 chambers loaded when you go to Mass on vacation.
Right.
I mean, you all probably have experienced this. I mean, it's pretty awful. It's pretty awful out there. So the banal really affects you as you said, how you worship.
Right, absolutely. So let's get into that a little bit. I think that's a good point, is the music affects, right? The music affects our worship. But get into that a little bit, because, you can look at the Mass and say, well, I'm going to Mass. Jesus is there in the Eucharist. What does it matter that we have, whatever hymnal we're using and whatever songs we're singing, whether it's chant or guitar music, what does it matter? To kind of get into why you personally, I think even beyond that, the church has this music for liturgy. What's the point of putting all this work in when you could not, right?
Well, I mean, we could be conducting this interview with 2 tin cans and a string, right?
Right.
Okay, we have beautiful equipment, we have beautiful apportionments, and a lovely little place to do this in. And, why drive a Yugo when you can have a Maserati?
Right.
I mean, what we have in Catholic music just is an art form. There is something to be said for doing that which is excellent. Even it's like the composer who writes music that the last 3 symphonies Mozart wrote. He wrote them in a very short time. Never heard them in his lifetime. He wasn't expecting to hear them. Okay, he just wrote them because he had to.
Right.
Okay, and their excellence does not necessarily draw a great big crowd. So, but there is an appeal to authenticity. Whether in the actual form of the sacred music art, Pius X and Trolla Sollecitudine, which is the motu proprio back in 1903. What is sacred music? The 3 criteria, and but 2 of them, it has to be sacred and it has to be art. Okay, you can have a jug band play a psalm setting, all right, or you know what I mean. It could be either or. I'm singing and we're playing sacred words, but what you do doesn't involve skill, but it's not the same level of art. And that level of art is what fed into the traditions of our church for so many centuries. Yeah. And that, especially these days, people just want, especially I think young people, want something that is beyond the length of their nose, right. Okay, as far as just tradition and what you can anchor yourself in, and to know that the canons of art are universal.
Right.
And so when you listen to a piece of music that has survived for 500 years, something has got to be operating in that is a little more than row your boat.
Right.
So
yeah, absolutely.
I mean, if that makes any sense, but but I find a tremendous appeal to that we all labor, and it's never perfect, Sure. Great music is humbling more than anything else.
Yeah, so as much as I would kind of be interested in hearing a jug band play the psalm settings,
you haven't lived.
Some Appalachian, hootenanny or whatever.
Whatever floats your boat, but
right.
but when you put it in front of the tabernacle, right. It's game's up.
Exactly. Okay. So, you talk about the levels of art there. Can you kind of open up for our listeners a little bit, especially with music and sacred music? Kind of what causes one level of art to be higher than another in the realm of music? I mean, clearly you hear, I think even an untrained listener can kind of hear certain things in classical pieces or sacred art that you can kind of put your finger on, okay, this is better than the jug band playing the songs. But, I'm
going to hear about that one, but
but what elevates, Mozart from the jug band? Is there an order there?
Well, first of all, I think that there's a respective genius to every musical genre. Okay, it's not that they're not excellent. It's just that where they're put.
Right. Like
there's an argument that says, well, do whatever you need to do in church to get kids in, whatever works. Well, whatever works is not necessarily what's appropriate. Right. But someone. First of all, when you talk about people like Mozart and Beethoven, these people did not just fall off the turnip wagon. Okay, they were seriously trained people. So first of all, what you have is is a competency in theory and compositional technique and counterpoint and stuff. That you bring that to bear, then God provides the genius that gets funneled through all that to make a work of art. So there's certain structures and certain technical things that are the baseline of some of these compositions. That elevate it a little. There's a little more structured, and that really there's other things that play into it. There's inspiration, but many different genres can get inspired.
Right.
But and then again, you take somebody like Mozart, somebody I never really appreciated when I was a lot younger, but I do now. Then you take that kind of talent, and then you put the fact that for the first years of his life, he was in service to the Catholic Church. Right. And you get Catholic sacred masterworks.
Right.
So.
Yeah, it's incredible. Yeah, I think you mentioned your atheist friend who
it's
discovered the church through the music, and it's interesting when you look back at all these great composers. So much of it is sacred music.
It is.
Masses and things like that.
Right. That Mozart's fame was not from his symphonies. Right. Mozart's fame was from his masses that he wrote for Salzburg Cathedral. Yeah. And everybody heard Mozart's mass, so you find copies of his masses in all the abbeys, all over Germany and stuff like that. But yeah.
Yeah, it's fantastic. So someone like Mozart, obviously a genius, but he's kind of working within, at least with the masses, working within a clearly defined structure.
Right.
You as a composer, when you write music and you're working within this structure, I'll hear artists, I've heard artists in other mediums say, well, how do you create, how do you innovate, where's that invention come from? So how does that work? As an artist, as a composer, you want to make something in some ways new or different.
Yeah.
You're creating art, you're not just copying something that happened before. So how can you find that kind of invention when you're working within kind of defined structures of not only music but the mass or things like that? You're not going to create a new part of the mass for your piece. So anyway, as an artist, how do you kind of meld those two things together?
Well, that's been a bit of a journey, because at one point in my life I was very, very hung up on that everything I had to write had to be different, had to be totally, totally original. And so you just stop writing. Right. Because if you listen to early Beethoven, it sounds like Haydn. It's his teacher. Mm-hmm. And Haydn sounds like the guy who taught him. And to a certain extent, all of a sudden they break away.
Right.
Then, Beethoven becomes a Beethoven, And so I write for that's changed too, because when I was growing up, I won a competition for the NPM in 1981. I won a bunch of prizes and I got published. So a good part of my life was getting published by major Catholic people, So I would write for that. And then I realized probably in the late 80s and early 90s that I was writing just kind of the wrong kind of stuff. I was just up a blind alley, because I was writing stuff that actually wasn't really authentically Catholic. So I stopped submitting to them because they were refusing everything anyway. But anywho, but composition after that got to be like, I love St. Joseph, okay? Mm-hmm. It took me 5 years to find a librettist, but I wrote a chancel opera on St. Joseph up north. It's the only one probably that I know of in the world. And I researched it, believe me. I wouldn't say it if it wasn't. If there's another one, let me know. Right. But I don't think so. Right now I'm trying to do one of Father Thomas Frederick Price, who's from North Carolina. Yeah. And again, a librettist is a hard person to come by. But was it worth waiting the 5 years to get the fellow who wrote the text? Yes. So you write a work of art, and the work of art is indelibly Catholic. Yeah. It has no commercial value. Okay, it just doesn't. But I wanted a first century take on St. Joseph. Yeah. And it transformed a lot of people who experienced that piece. So my motivation for writing stuff now, I love to write art songs. So if I love poetry, so I get poetry, I write it. So what's driving me now is not necessarily even liturgical stuff. I just wrote a mass for the year of St. Joseph here. It's a polyphonic mass. You have to do that, but so that's a purpose-driven thing, you know. That was a commission, and that's fun.
Yeah.
But these days, you work in a structure. I mean, I write very quickly, like for stuff like the Novus Ordo Mass, you know, that has a lot of different refrains and psalm tones and things. So I'm very facile about writing things like that. But that's not the same kind of compass. That's utilitarian.
Sure.
But still, every once in a while, you have to stop that because it's like eating, like, you know, Twix bars for 3 meals a day. You just dull. You need something that you do for art for its own sake.
Right.
And I just find myself, I still think there's miles in the Catholic Church to bring the saints of tradition and the modern saints into a 21st century light so people can have a different view.
Yeah.
You know?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's great. The opera for St. Joseph interests me greatly.
Oh, it's I'll play it for you, and
Yeah.
it's a different take on St. Joseph. I don't know some of the folk down here might be ready for it. I mean, it was we pushed a little parameters on it, but it really is viewing Joseph as a human being. It just sounds trite, as human being, but just it's a very human view of. There was some conjecture with the librettist as far as expanding his view of Joseph, but. Well, if you listen to The Chosen, the series that's on there, they're doing a lot of that with the fleshing out stories of the disciples. So it's the same, but it just really, I think, captures a certain human portrait of Joseph that he himself transcended in his journey, and it was really wild. It's scored for strings, organ, and anvil. Because the anvil is him. Yeah. You know, it's a tecton striking it all the way through.
That's great.
I'll play it for you sometime.
Yeah, that'd be wonderful. The anvil's my favorite instrument.
You'll love it. So. Get a tuned one.
That's right.
I'll give you 2 hammers.
That's great. So tell us a little about the process of that, of writing an opera. So obviously you have a librettist who's doing the words, the lyrics for you. But there's obviously a meaning that you're conveying through the music, right? And there's a meaning that's in the text. So how does that work when you're working with someone else to kind of take the music here and the writing here and get those to kind of be on the same page? Yeah,
it's an interesting process because for me, the text will, if you set it properly, will define the musical shape. So, and there's always the challenge too, like composers have always done, that if you see something, a thing in the text, you try to represent it in music, you know. So whether it's pathos or whether it's joy or whatever, there's different musical figures you can use. So a lot of it is the challenge of telling the actual story in using musical idioms and musical devices. So in that 5 years, I had other people that were submitting stuff, and so it was a lot of false starts. Beautiful music, but like I wrote a whole other triptych on the pieces that I rejected.
Oh wow!
Yeah, so, but all like the first piece I wrote was called Shadowed Stone, and it was a poem by a friend of mine up north, and it was based on the statue of Joseph in Blessed Sacrament Church holding the infant. And for some reason, one night I saw it. I said, there was a story behind this. Yeah. And so I asked her, and she wrote this amazing poem. And so the textures all are kind of thick at the beginning, you know, and then just the poetry emerges and he comes out of it. It's
that's great. I would love to see or listen to that and also see the statue there and just have that kind of an immersive
that can be arranged if you like.
That'd be wonderful. So we're here with Tom Savoy. Among other things, he is the director of music at the St. Joseph's Minor Seminary in Charlotte, North Carolina. So minor seminary is for college-age young men. You're heavily involved there. Tell us what you do there with the young men and sacred music. How does that work with teaching them? Are you teaching them chant? Are you teaching them theory? What goes on there?
This is kind of an evolving, program. This started off with me teaching them a class on Gregorian chant. And so, and also I do Gregorian chant and I do the Schola. So the Schola is just like the seminary choir, which happen to sing a lot of Gregorian chant. So you teach them some music fundamentals as far as how to read chant on a staff, how to interpret it, how to sing it properly, how to phrase it properly, And the Schola started off very small, very simple pieces, and so over the past 6 years or so, we've sort of expanded out. It's got a little more complicated with the repertoire. They've been able to do more involved things, and they did a CD a few years ago, and which went very well. And so that's what we're continuing to do. And as you conduct your program, you find there's other needs for it. Like these guys, they're most of the music they're going to read as priests is not going to be Gregorian chant. Right. It's going to be Western notation, and so we're probably going to be expanding that to teach some music reading and modern staff, things like that. Also, we do some music appreciation. I remember talking to the director of the major seminary in Dunwoody, and I said, so what do you look for in the students that come? And she goes, I remember two things she said. One was some knowledge of music before 1965, and the other was they could match pitch. Huh. And I just was kind of incredulous, So it gets to be that you get a new class in, and every young man in the class I give a voice test to. And, some of the guys fare better than others, but they all get a chance for that first semester to sing chant in class. And then the ones who have a decent voice, doesn't have to be a spectacular voice, but a decent voice, sometimes are simply conscripted into, they're voluntold to be in Schola. Yeah. And so it's a lot of fun. We do have a lot of fun together.
That's great.
But I think a lot of this is born out of the rector, his formation experience. I mean, Father Kauth would tell you he probably had one music class in all of the years of his formation. And it was no great shakes. Right. And I think he has made a commitment, and I think wisely so, and most generous commitment to that these young men will not be musically illiterate, right. That they'll come out being able to sing, and not just sing, but sing musically. Does that make any sense? Yeah. I mean, with some kind of artistic sense. I'm with Beethoven when he says, it's not a crime. I'm paraphrasing. It's not a bad thing to hit a wrong note, but to hit it with no passion, without passion, is absolutely a criminal. All right. So, not just sing, but make art and make something beautiful. And I think we just try to imbue that in them, and try to give them a realization too. That, I was sort of astounded when I found out that Mozart was Catholic, or that Haydn was Catholic, or that Schubert was Catholic. I can go on down the line, right? And to acquaint them, we do music appreciation, but I'll do music appreciation with Catholic composers from they were all Catholic back in medieval times, but Renaissance, classical, Romantic, and just who are the Catholic voices here that and let's build a little bit of a connection point. Yeah. When you ask them, have you ever heard of, Bruckner? And they look at you and it's like, I mentioned libretto in class. Yeah. They all just glazed right over. I'm like, okay. So, yes, it's educating on a lot of levels.
Yeah, that's great. So I imagine, especially from that story, that most of the men coming in don't have any training.
Very few.
And so what's the process like when you're taking a raw kind of voice and then teaching that up? Because as we said, we recorded you doing the antiphons for one of our series, and it was great. I wouldn't have known that, they've only had 1 or 2 years probably of training there. Some
of that group were there in their 4th year, but a lot of them were in their 2nd year. Yeah. This is a learn by doing thing. Yeah. And I find that, especially with the considerable Catholic homeschool population here. Right. Okay. They have had very little experience in choral music. They might sing, but if you say, whereas if they were in a regular high school, they'd have to be in glee club or chorus, and they would do all this stuff. But so a lot of the boys simply have never sung in a chorus before, so they need to hear the sound of other voices around them.
Right.
It's something you just can't push a button. They need to see how does my voice fit in. So you get them into the flow of the chorus as soon as possible, even if it's just singing the doxology or the psalm tone in a Magnificat. Get them singing, and get them experiencing with this. Then it's sort of a short jump between doing that and saying, okay, this guy sings this, but you're going to sing this. Okay. I mean, sometimes that might mean just holding a note as a drone. And it's amazing, once you start that process, they make the connections really quickly.
Right.
And then I do rehearsal CDs for MP3s for them. And I got to give them a lot of credit. They'll listen, and they'll learn their parts, and we have little tricks of the trade that we do, you know. But the best thing they just need to do, do the thing, you know, right? So that's what we get them. We get them into the mainstream right away.
Right, that's great. So it's exciting to me when you see the seminarians singing, or even just the ones who are not in the schola, but they're just surrounded by the chant and singing, you know, the liturgy of the hours, or, you know, singing the mass and being surrounded by that. We talked earlier about, you know, is this a movement, right, or is it kind of spotted? But you know, it's exciting to me to see, oh, hey, there's going to be 30 guys in the next couple of years who start to get ordained, and then they can bring this appreciation and knowledge of sacred music to 30 churches, right? Out there. This is kind of a force multiplier.
Well, it's exponential, you know. Yeah, and I think that's the hope. Plan sounds devious.
Right.
It's a hope for a plan.
Right.
Anyway, but yeah, that's the end result, you know. And you would hope. I would like them to come out, not to put it in negative terms, not hating it, because I grew up with a lot of clergy who just hated it. They hated the chant. They hated sitting for it, and probably because it was done badly.
Right.
So, you know, you want to give these guys a little bit of a multifaceted experience of what it is. Now, some of them are going to go out and they're still not going to like it, and I get that. But boy, if you can get like 6, 7 out of 10, you're really doing well.
Yeah.
And to have them say, look, I know who Mozart is, and I know who Bird is, and I know what Palestrina is, and you know, I like this music, and I'm going to hire somebody who can give our people that. Right. And that's I mean, it's a long road, but it's been started.
Right. Well, and the knowledge goes a long way, and you
does.
know who to hire at least, and it's not just, well, this music director's been here for 20 years, so we just do whatever they say, you know, and they can have an input there. I think it's exciting.
Don't expect to make a lot of friends because because the culture is still very much, I don't want to say anti-tradition, but it's just uneducated.
Yeah.
They need to be shown.
Right.
They need to hear it.
Yeah. It's I know there's different tastes, but it is shocking to me that that when people prefer this certain type, that's just it sounds like, I don't know, like a third-rate folk song from the 70s.
That's because it is.
And then and then over here you have, even if it's not done huge and big, you know, just a French horn as well with the choir, and it really does elevate you. And I think that people just need to hear it.
Yeah, I mean, you're dropping a name, but I mean, I've been in a church where the music is provided by one person singing a solo soprano. Yeah. And artistically, it's so beautiful. It's just well sung, well done, and it fits the liturgical apportionments. It doesn't have to be really complicated. Right. It just needs some training and some shaping. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about that a little bit. As much as I'd love to have, 35 orchestral masses a year like Monsignor out in Minnesota, but what are practical steps? What can be done now to bring sacred music more into our churches, on Sundays during Mass? How can that happen without, the seminarians are probably a good start, but for people who want to bring this to their churches, what can be done?
Well, it's very difficult and well nigh impossible to do it if you don't have clergy that want it.
Right.
Okay, and if if your parish priest, if your pastor is not in that camp, you're going to have a really tough time.
Right.
But if they will be open to it, there are ways of just starting small.
Yeah.
But don't forget that when a thing that was just a tried and true hackneyed saying, Gregorian chant has primacy of place in the liturgy. Well, hogwash. It was nice to say, but nobody ever did it. I mean, where did it fit in? Nobody told us that Paul VI came out with Jubilate Deo, a compendium of chant for congregations in 1971, because they were ignoring it. They were ignoring all the prescriptions, even then.
Right.
In the original, 1903, they were saying congregations should sing some chant. So a great place to start is just to go get yourself some unison chants and train your choir to sing.
Yeah.
It's amazing how fast people will learn to sing even on a Gregorian stat. But and then there's simple 2-part things and 3-part things for the choir. There's also a good, what has come out of the new liturgical movement is a renewed compositional bent toward congregational chant.
Yeah.
So original things have been written. We use some of them at St. Thomas. And people respond to them, they sing them. They're not really difficult. They're not. We don't even use the organ.
Yeah, that's great.
So there are ways to start small, but what you want to do is start integrous. You want to start with integrity and with the fact that we're teaching folks is authentically Catholic.
Right.
And has as its background, some manner of chant. So what separates churchy music, Catholic churchy music?
Right.
Well, you see it in the movies. They got some monks chanting in the back. It's a caricature.
Right.
But we're chanters.
Right.
That's what our tradition has. The whole veins of art have been in organ improvisations and pieces on Gregorian chant. And why we turned our back on it, it didn't make a lot of money. But Noel Coward, I don't know if you know who Noel Coward was. He had a lot. He was a great playwright and wrote a lot of musicals. But one of my favorite quotes of his is, "It's amazing the potency of cheap music," and it's very true. It just goes a long way.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's interesting too, though. I think you talked about your work at St. Thomas Aquinas Parish, and I've been a few times, and I think even that is a good kind of thing to point to and say, the music itself is bringing people to the church. It is bring a tighter community there because you want to hear it, right? No one's coming to listen to a Marty Haugen song, right?
I'm sure there's still people at St. Thomas that would certainly enjoy that whole vein of music, and I would be not telling the truth that wasn't the case. But I will have to say that last Sunday, we have now have an extraordinary farm Latin Mass at 11:30 on Sunday morning, which has been a game changer. And even through this whole brouhaha of last year, you can see the congregation exponentially as things get lifted, just growing and growing and growing. And lots of young folks. I walked out after 11:30 Mass on the piazza. It was filled with kids and little babies and young families, and it was amazing. I said, I don't know where up north in my diocese I probably could have found this, except maybe in the one church that had an extraordinary form, has lots of Catholic families. But it's full of life. Was it Athanasius Schneider, Bishop Schneider said the Latin Mass is the youth Mass. And I say that to kids in their 20s, and they go, I'm sure there's lots of kids in their 20s that wouldn't say that, but there's a good portion that are attracted to it. And it's not because of nostalgia, because they're not that old. It's because of integrity.
Exactly. No, you definitely see it. I know in our diocese here, you can kind of pick out the churches that are doing some more traditional things, even if it's not the extraordinary form, or even if the music is better, or the liturgy is just more reverent, and there's an attraction to that for sure, which I think is encouraging just overall. I remember a few years ago, you all with the chorale came out and did an orchestral mass at St. Michael's, where I'm a parishioner, and one, I'd never seen the church that packed before, so it really brought people there. And two, I know that that we got people who stayed, who had either not been there before or had been there occasionally, right? Creaster Catholics, things like that, who came out for the Mass, and were really moved by it and continued to come to the church, or came more Sundays.
Excellent.
So I think that beauty can really bring
Absolutely,
people in.
absolutely. When I first went to Monsignor Schuler's church in 1993, a lot of us were looking at each other. I had a friend of mine who was a composer. He's gone to God now. But at the end, toward the late 80s, we were all looking at each other going, what does it mean to be a Catholic musician? Like, I mean, I'm writing hymn arrangements, and I'm writing this, and I'm writing that, and this hybrid this, and all this eclecticism. And I was reading Schuler's journals for 10 years, but I went out there for his Sunday morning Mass, and it was a Novus Ordo. It was not an Ep. It was a Latin Mass. He's up there in the loft with 70 singers and members of the St. Paul Orchestra, Symphony Orchestra. And the minute they went into that Mozart Kyrie, I had two things on my mind. I said, Mozart's music is worthy to be here.
Yeah.
And the other thing was a whole flourish of anger as to why didn't I understand that this vein of music was mine and ours? And that led 4 years later to starting our own venture. And there was no turning back.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Before we wrap up, I wanted to get your thoughts for our listeners and viewers. You do a music appreciation course, study at the seminary. For someone listening, watching, who's maybe knows the name Mozart and Beethoven, but not much else, hasn't gotten into classical music or sacred music, how do you do it? How do you start getting an appreciation for it and a knowledge of it so that you can begin enjoying it?
For somebody who's never experienced
someone who's just not well versed in it, right? I think all of us have kind of heard classical pieces before, but it can be similar to kind of art or painting. It feels like there's a barrier to really. You need this knowledge, or you need to be able to hear a piece and say, "Oh, that's so and so's cantata or whatever."
Right.
But where do you start for someone who really wants to get into classical music and sacred music?
Well, I think a great place to start with that is, when I teach music appreciation, I'm really light on the theory, but I'm heavy on the stories, because these composers had great stories.
Yeah.
I mean, you just, they're proverbial, So sometimes to give people, you want to break the ice, the fact that these were living human beings. I mean, they were not just like, statues and busts and stuff like that. Bach was a, red-blooded German male, and Mozart. I mean, some of the stories are great. So sometimes it's getting people intrigued into the person, and then you just have to be careful. Like, some people are very analytical and they just love how themes interact and keys. Some people just. But I think it's much the same what you said about a painting. Painting. So you look at a painting and you have a certain gut impression, but then somebody starts to say, well, look, this guy used line and shadow and this and that, and all of a sudden, things come out of the painting that you never knew. You have to be willing to want to do this, okay? And if I have, the fellows, some of them just glaze over when I talk about this stuff. That's all right, but some of them don't. So I think part of it is just you pick a point of entry, and then explore it. The technical part of it can come later. It's not just, yes, it sounds beautiful. Why does it sound beautiful? Well, they did this. So you just pick a place and you start.
Yeah,
It could be something that's very, very appealing, something light. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thanks for coming and talking to us about all this. It's fascinating, and I'm encouraged by your work, and encouraged for the church here locally, but also beyond, to bring the sacred music to more and more people.
I'm indebted to a lot of, certainly the Bishop Jugas, but also Father Patrick Winslow, who brought me down here, Father Cowell, Father Codd, who's our pastor at St. Thomas right now, and Father Reed. There's been so many champions of create sacred, Father Christian. I can go on, but I'm going to forget somebody there. We already have Father Barone. But there was a cadre of these priests who were just so supportive. So coming down here has been a real blessing.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, thanks so much for being with us, Tom.
You're welcome.
Thank you for joining us on Good Catholic Great Stories. If you enjoyed the show, please be sure to leave a review and subscribe. You can listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and wherever podcasts are available. You can also watch the videos of these podcasts on our Good Catholic YouTube channel. Learn more at goodcatholic.com. Thanks for listening, and God bless.